Hi, I'm Coach Tori Atchison with Fast Pitch Prep. Coach Don McKinley and I started Fast Pitch Prep in the hopes of sharing our knowledge about the great game of fast pitch softball. Here today we're going to be giving you our recruiting seminar and all the information that we feel is important for you to know and have about the recruiting process. We're going to work our way through several different topics today that will give you the guidance you need and the information you need to make sense out of this very complicated process. Recruiting is something that I've spent about the last 40 years of my life working on, and I want to share as much information with you as we possibly can today. So, Fast Pitch Prep is a company designed to share knowledge about everything that we do with the great game of fast pitch. We do our recruiting seminars. We also offer several other programs, and you can always reach us at the information on your screen if you have any questions about Fast Pitch Prep. The recruiting seminar is something that I believe is helpful because the recruiting process itself is, in many ways, I believe, the most messed up thing that you will ever experience. I believe it's the most confusing, the most complicated, the most difficult, challenging, frustrating, and to some people, apparently unfair process ever. So we're going to work our way through this. Hopefully by the time we're done, you're going to feel a whole lot better. So why is it so complicated? There's several reasons why. Number one, we try to get people to understand that recruiting is not an exact science. It's one of those things that is very much like a beauty contest. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and each coach and each team is looking for different qualities that they find to be attractive. So here's the trick, though, we need you to understand. It is a beauty contest, but as unfair as it seems, it's a beauty contest that really has no rules. When you watch the Miss Universe pageant on TV, one of the things that they will tell you is that they're judging these beautiful women in certain categories. There's the talent contest and lots of other things that are part of the process that they use to determine who's going to be the winner. The reality of recruiting is there really are no rules. So picture yourself being in that beauty contest trying to figure out how to win when nobody can tell you what you need to do to be the winner. The thing that is most important for you to understand is that if we're looking for fairness and looking for something that makes sense, recruiting is probably not a great place to look. Another reason why this process is so messed up is the college coaches and their challenges in recruiting. I use this slide because I think it tells a tale for how college coaches feel. Once upon a time, when you went to the circus, they did this circus act where one performer would be spinning a plate on a stick. And as the show develops, they get further and further in, and he's got more and more plates spinning. And then he's running around the stage like a crazy man trying to keep them all spinning. That's how I think most college coaches feel. And when we think about what the plates symbolize, is they symbolize why recruiting is complicated for that college coach. Think of each plate as a player. So each college coach already has a roster, let's say 15, 18, 20 players on their roster. So that's 20 plates that they're spinning. They have kids that are incoming that are going to be freshmen next year. Let's say they have an incoming freshman class of 5 or 6 kids. That's 5 or 6 more plates. And then they undoubtedly will have players that they're looking at and targeting further on down the ladder, deeper into high school ages, and looking at all those players as potential additions to their roster. So when it's all said and done, most college coaches are spinning probably 25 to 30 or more plates at one time. So for the college coach, it's a very complicated process, which then translates into adding more complication for you as a player or parent trying to make sense of the recruiting process. If that college coach is having a difficult time planning for the future, sometimes it's because you never know when one of those plates is going to come crashing down on the stage. And when that plate comes crashing down, that college coach is going to have to figure out a way to keep this act moving. So they grab another plate and they start spinning it, but while they're looking for that next plate, another one might come crashing down. So they're running around on that stage like crazy people trying to keep the thing moving forward. Okay? So the college coach is part of why this process is so complicated. Another part of the process that is adding to this level of confusion and making it so complicated is the role of the athlete and their parents and people around them. The reality of recruiting is simple. For most players, the player that's going through recruiting right now is their first opportunity to learn anything about recruiting. They have zero experience with the process. Every once in a while, you'll have a chance to deal with a family who's had a sibling that's come through the process earlier, and you always can tell when you have a conversation with one of those parents, because you can tell right away they're asking questions and looking for information based on what they've learned their first time through. But the vast majority of the players and parents that I've dealt with over the years are first-timers. So part of why this process is so messed up is that the recruits and their families have no experience with the process. So picture yourself trying to do anything for the very first time. It's always a challenge. If you take that project that's the first time that you're working on it and you make it something as important and as cherished as the future of your child in a college softball program, obviously this adds to the level of expectation and the part of the reason why this thing is as messed up as it is. Secondly, most parents and players are absolutely unrealistic about where they fit in. Think about it. When you talk to most young players, what do they say when you ask them what kind of schools they're interested in? You can bank on it being the 8 schools that were just in the College World Series. So right now, if you asked a player who's looking at schools and just getting started in this process, they would list Oklahoma and Florida and those types of schools. And those are amazing places with amazing programs, but the reality of it is the vast majority of kids are not capable of playing at those schools. So that adds another layer to this complication. Another thing that we try to get people to understand, and parents especially, and dads, no offense, but you're the biggest culprits in this, is this what I call selling a used car mentality. There's an awful lot of families that go into this process thinking it's their job to trick that college coach into thinking that their daughter is something that she's not. They work really hard to try to cover up any flaws she might have and promote all her strengths like she's never made a mistake. The idea that a player is perfect is not realistic, and college coaches aren't looking for perfect, they're looking for right. But what they don't want is to get 5 feet off the used car lot and have the car blow up. And that's what happens sometimes for college coaches when they feel like they've been misled and deceived. And so parents and players, we have to get you to understand that we're not trying to trick anybody. What we want you to do and to learn through this seminar is how to market yourself properly to the right kinds of schools. And the idea that you can trick someone into recruiting your daughter is going to lead you down a very dark and very challenging path to dig yourselves back out of. Another reason why this is so challenging for families and players is many of them go into it thinking that the only important thing is if they're going to get a scholarship or not. Now, don't get me wrong, I like money as much as the next person. And if there's a way for me to get a better deal or to have a better opportunity to save some money in the process, I understand why people are motivated by that. But the reality of it is there's an awful lot of college softball players who get very little, if any, scholarship money. And if you go into this process as a family thinking that somehow the scholarship is the most important thing, again, I think that's part of why this is so messed up, because for many players, getting a scholarship is not realistic. And then finally, the other thing that I think is important for parents and players to remember is ultimately I think what we're looking for is balance. We want you to be able to find balance between the academic side and the athletic side in the schools that you're looking for. But all these things add up to why this process is so complicated, and part of the reason why so many families really struggle with this opportunity to be recruited. So I use this signpost because I think it very clearly wraps up how most families feel about this process. They feel lost, they feel confused, they feel perplexed. All those things I think are true and are definitely things that will be emotions that you feel as you work your way through this process. Hopefully here in a little while you're going to feel a whole lot better and be a little bit less of any of these things. So where do I fit in? That's part of what we just spoke about with our parents and players. It's a difficult question, and why it's so difficult is that players have really no way of knowing what kinds of schools are a good fit for them and what kinds of places are the schools that they should be looking for. So one of the things that we try to help players understand is that there is a right place and a right school for them. Why is it so difficult for a player to know where she fits in? Well, first and foremost, most of the people who are in that player's life, who are close to them, are too close to them to be honest. A player's parents certainly loves their child so much that it's unlikely that they're going to be able to look their daughter in the eye and say, "Sweetheart, you're a great kid, we love you very much, but you have no chance of playing at some schools." And the coaches of players are typically in a similar situation where they're so close to the players that they're coaching that they feel it's difficult to tell them the truth. There are an awful lot of travel ball coaches and high school coaches out there who would be able to and have enough knowledge to be able to tell that player that she's not a fit for some of those big time top 10 college World Series type programs, but they feel that they cannot tell those players the truth. Sometimes it's because if you're a travel ball coach and you have to be brutally honest with a player, maybe that player is going to leave and go to another team. If you're a high school coach, maybe you don't want to set yourself up for the aggravation and the politics that would go along with having to tell a player something that's difficult for them to hear. Now, we all understand players want to dream the big dream. I think everybody starts off in this process feeling like they're good enough to play at those college World Series types programs, but the reality of it is that most of them are not. So how do we figure out, and how do you find out how you fit in? There's several things that I think you can do. Number one, I think you should see as many college softball games as you can. And we're fortunate now in this day and age because there's so many games on TV that you can see college softball being played at a very high level. I think that should give you a chance to see if you're the kind of player who feels like they would fit in at a big-time program. The other thing that I would strongly recommend is if you are in a position where you can do it, to get out and see college practices. Practices to me are way more valuable and way more important than seeing the games, because when you think about it, the games are sort of the dessert. That's the ice cream with the whipped cream on top. Practice, that's the meat and potatoes. That's what goes on every day. The other reason why I think practice is so valuable for a player is if you're at practice, you might get to see a player perform hundreds of times, whereas in a game you might not see them perform at all. An example, let's say you were watching Florida on TV. Florida right now is blessed to have the reigning college player of the year in Kelly Barnhill, who's a tremendous pitcher. If you watch Florida on TV and you're a center fielder, you might watch the center fielder do nothing but run out to her position and run back off the field because Kelly Barnhill has 15 or 16 or 18 strikeouts. So what's human nature? When you're that player sitting in the stands at a Florida game, you watch their center fielder or their left fielder, in your mind you make this leap. Well, I could be the center fielder on this team. Well, of course you could, because that day in that game, the pitching was so dominant that the center fielder didn't really do anything except maybe back up some plays, maybe run out to her position and run back off the field. So the picture you get from watching a game can be a little skewed. Now, how is practice different? If you go to practice, you're going to get to see that center fielder make dozens and dozens of plays. You might see that center fielder going from foul line to foul line making plays. You might see her diving for catches. You might see her climbing the outfield fence and robbing home runs. You might see her making a throw to home plate from deep in center field that never gets more than like 8 feet off the ground and is a one-hop throw to that catcher. All those things give you a much clearer perspective and a much clearer picture in your mind of how talented of a player she truly is. And why is that important? Because if you're the player who's dreaming of going to Florida and you want to invest your time and effort in trying to get yourself recruited to Florida, we believe that it's important for you to know whether you're the kind of player that actually can play there. Okay? So why is that challenging? Why do some people not want to do it? Because at some point in time, for an awful lot of players, reality comes up and kicks them right in the butt, and they have to come to grips with the fact that while I'm a very good player, I'm certainly not that good. And for some players, that's a very difficult thing. And no one wants to be the dream killer, so you can count on very few people that are close to a player being able to be honest with them. Something else that we have started with Fast Pitch Prep that we think is a great service and something that we would recommend that you look into. We do an assessment and evaluation program. What that means is that's an opportunity for you to have your skills evaluated by former college coaches, people that are very knowledgeable about what those kinds of schools are looking for, so that we can then tell you whether Florida is a realistic option or not. Now, that doesn't mean that a player has to give up on their dream, but ultimately, we think it's important for you to have some guidance. So if you're interested in the idea of having us do an assessment for you, you can look it up on our website, which is fastpitchprep.com, and there's tons of information available there. But one of the things that we always ask players as the recruiting process unfolds is, where do you think you fit in, and then why do you think you fit there? And that hopefully will give us some guidance and an opportunity to help them make sense out of this process. So I love this slide because I think this really hits on the main point of our discussion. On one side, we have a major leaguer who's getting ready to hit and obviously looks like $1 million player. In the other slide, we have a very young, probably rec league baseball player who clearly looks like he's just learning how to hit. So why is this an important visual for you? On one side, you've got what parents, I think, see when they watch their kids play. On the other side, you have what the college coaches see when they watch that player play. And it's a pretty extreme example, but I think it helps you have a better perspective on why it's so difficult for people to understand where they fit in the food chain. Okay? So why else is this so complicated, so messed up? There's an awful lot of bad information. Bad information in recruiting typically comes from class to class to class and across recruiting over the years. Typically, what I've experienced is that for most families and most players who have been through the recruiting process is that they have a tendency to exaggerate, to polish, to shine, and honestly, in some cases, to flat out lie about what their process was like, what they experienced when they went through it, and things that they learned and liked and didn't like about the process. So we would hope that as you work your way through this process, you'll be the first in a wave of families that share the truth moving forward. It does no one any good to keep perpetuating the lies and the misunderstandings and the things that are out there that are adding to this confusion and to these problems. We know parents and players often exaggerate their experience. Not out of maliciousness, but sometimes they just want to feel better about what they've experienced. So we know that there's a lot of this exaggeration going on. I love this slide because I think it's the ultimate fish story. We all know that we've been out at the lake, we've caught a fish that's this big. By the time we get back to the bar and have had a beer or two, that fish is a record. And this picture, I think, sums it up very clearly. All of a sudden, the fish that we caught is bigger than the boat. I think the same is true when people talk about the scholarships that they got and the impression that they want to make that their daughter is a scholarship player or a full ride player. We hear it all the time. Of course my daughter got a full ride. We'll talk more about why that's something you should be skeptical about, but we just love this picture because I think it gives you a really clear indication that there can be an awful lot of misinformation and exaggeration going on. So there's experts in all areas of fast pitch softball. You have your travel ball coaches, your high school coaches. Occasionally you'll work with a recruiting service. Sometimes it's just a parent who's gone through this process in the past. This misinformation has become almost the gold standard that people live by. If you sit around at the ballpark long enough, you will hear every one of these misconceptions stated over and over and over again. And one of the things that we want to do today is help you understand that these misconceptions are just that. They are not accurate. They are not true, and you should not be basing your decision making and your feelings about how recruiting is working for you based on these things. So let's get started with the misconceptions. Misconception number one is that you can believe the websites. What do we mean when we talk about the websites? Well, those of you that are involved in fast pitch softball have seen some of the charts and the services that rank players, that list who's going to what school. There's two very, very good ones that are very famous. One is Gold Fast Pitch and the other one is Flow Softball. Both of these services do a great job of relaying information and telling people where players are going and what schools they're planning on attending. You also have team websites, which each team basically has a website talking about their players, where they're going to school, maybe the schools that are interested in them if they have not decided on a college yet. One of the things that we tell people all the time is that while these websites are fun to look at, and they do offer some information that can be beneficial, that they cannot be counted on to be 100% accurate. If you believe everything you read on the websites, I think you're very, very likely to be led astray. None of us look at Facebook and look at some of the things that you see that come across on your page and believe everything there that's true. None of us look at Twitter and believe everything on Twitter is true, so we cannot look at these websites and believe that everything on them is true. Just because it's listed doesn't mean that it's factual. I don't know for sure what each one of these websites uses as a standard for proof, but I don't know that there's that much cross-checking and that much backing up of things that are stated. So it may be true, it may not be true. But one of the things that we always want to think about is to look at all these things with a skeptical eye. Even if it is true, it may be misleading. Doesn't mean that a college coach has the same opinion as somebody else has shared on that website. And even if it is true, it may be an exaggeration. So one of the things that we want to make sure that you understand is it's fun to look at, it's kind of interesting to see, but don't base your thoughts and your decision making on this. One of the stories I tell all the time is I thank the good Lord very often that the internet and these websites were not as prominent and prevalent in 2007 as they are today. When I was coaching at Tennessee Tech, 2007 was our high water mark. We had a great team that made it to the regional tournament in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. That year, our team was talented enough and played well enough that we beat several powerhouse teams. We beat Florida State, we beat Nebraska, we beat Alabama, we beat California. We beat a lot of those annually strong, nationally recognized programs. And the reason I talk about that team is, in our starting 9, there were 5 players who, as they were getting recruited, started their careers as catchers. And the reason we talk about that is, if these websites had existed back then, 4 of those 5 players would have never come to play for me at Tennessee Tech because they would have looked at a website and said, hey, Coach Torrey doesn't need a catcher, look at his website. Coach Torrey doesn't need a catcher, look at Flow Softball, he's got one committed. And so what ended up happening is we had a team that had 5 catchers in the starting lineup. We had a catcher in right field, we had a catcher in left field, we had a catcher who caught, and on it went. And what did that add up to? It added up to a great team. For me, recruiting catchers was something I always did because I thought they were almost always good hitters. And that group of players added up to giving us the best team that I've ever coached. So I just thank the good Lord every day that these websites did not exist back then, because 4 of those 5 players probably would have chosen to go to a different school. Misconception number 2 is trying to find a school based on what you believe their anticipated needs are. I hear this every time I go to the ballpark. Take a look at their website. When you look at their website, you can study their roster. When you study their roster, you're going to see if they, quote unquote, need you as a freshman. What does that mean? That let's say you're going to graduate in 2018, that you're supposed to look at that roster and then determine if the player who plays the position you mostly play is going to be graduating and leaving, so that that spot's going to be open for you. This thought is one of the craziest things that I've ever heard. And here's why it's crazy. College coaches don't run their programs thinking about this next freshman that's going to jump into my lineup and plug in and replace that kid who was a senior who just graduated. There's always other players on that roster that play those key positions. And the likelihood that successful college coaches are banking on freshmen continually to fill those spots is crazy. So the thought that you can see a spot that's opening up for you based upon their graduation rate is faulty logic. Also, some college coaches will recruit consistently the same positions. We talked about just a second ago, I always recruited catchers. Just because a coach has a certain player on their roster that's younger than a graduating senior that would be competition for you for that spot on the team doesn't mean that that college coach is not going to be interested in you. That college coach could look at you and think that you're better than the player that they already have. That college coach could look at you and see somebody that if you can't beat out that player right away, you're going to have a role on the team and eventually move into that position. So trying to base a school and your interest in a school on some perceived idea that the water is going to part and you're going to be able to just slide right in and have a position is faulty thinking. So we want to make sure that you understand that trying to figure out what the college coaches are thinking is crazy. And we talked earlier about the college coach spinning the 25 plates or 30 plates of all the players that they either have on their roster right now or will have on their roster in the near future. If you think those college coaches are always aware of where the next need might be, that's again very faulty thinking. What we want you to be doing is looking at schools and not trying to anticipate whether or not there's a spot for you. Let the college coach decide for you if they're interested in you. If they are, that's great. Okay, so misconception number 3, being a very good player on a very good team does not equal being a top prospect. Let's talk about this one a little bit because it can be very confusing. For many players and their families, one of their thoughts is if we can just get on a really good travel team, that's going to open the door for us to be a top-level recruit for top-level schools. And unfortunately, that's another one of these misconceptions that sends people down the wrong road very often. Being a great player is being a great player, and you can be a great player on any team. Remember, the college coaches are looking for you individually. Now, being on a strong travel team might get a few more college coaches to come out and watch your games, but the reality of it is, if you're the 7th or 8th or 9th best player on that travel team, that sends a very clear message to those college coaches about where you fit in the food chain on that team. And so many families are spending a ton of extra money to be on some high-powered travel team so that they can be seen by college coaches, but unfortunately for what they gain by the traffic that they get and the college coaches that come to watch them play can be offset by the fact that they don't stand out as clearly on that team. And I know it can be very frustrating because for most parents, while they're watching their child play, they're doing this never-ending game of comparison. Well, first off, we have to caution you because that game of comparison that you're playing, you're really playing with your heart and not your head. You're looking at your daughter through a very specific filter and looking at other players through a much more critical one. And so what I think happens is that most parents watch their child play and they have an inflated vision of how their child compares to others. And so it's very frustrating because parents don't understand how they can see their amazing daughter and her not be recruited when someone else on the team is being recruited or has been recruited. And so the question that player often has is, well, what's the difference between me and her? Or why did she get an offer and why didn't I? And again, some of it can be the effect of being on that really strong team that puts you in a light where you do not stand out because you're in a company of other truly outstanding players. So yes, there's some benefits in being a good player on a great team, but that does not mean that that's going to lead to you being recruited. I have the good fortune now of helping with a really strong travel team that's a 16 and under team, and the vast majority of our players are committed to college programs. We have 2 really good players who are still looking. And I've had this discussion with them several times. Well, why am I not getting the interest that so-and-so is? I'm just as good or better. Well, again, being on such a talented team sometimes casts a light on some of the things that you're not as good at, or that some of your weaknesses shine even more because other players that you're being compared to on your own team are so strong. So being a good player on a very good team is a good thing in some regards, but in others it's not. And so we want you to be thinking about that as you're thinking about where to play. Honestly, some truly outstanding players on weaker teams are going to get a lot of interest because compared to everybody else on the field that day, they look amazing. And amazing stands out. And for some college coaches, seeing that amazing player shine way above everyone else on the field makes a much stronger impression than watching that good player, very good player, matched up on a team of players that are very similar to her or often better than her. So misconception number 3 is one that a lot of people struggle with. Hopefully that helps. Misconception number 4. This is the one that drives everybody crazy. And again, I hate to pick on dads, but dads are the ones that I hear most of the conversation with about scholarships. Here's what we want people to understand. This misconception is absolutely at the core of most recruiting heartache. parents and players see scholarships vastly differently than college coaches do. The college coach is basing whether or not they think you are a scholarship player on what they think you will become. Mom and dad, on the other hand, think that their daughter has earned a scholarship based upon what she has done. So it's an investment for that college coach on what you will do, not what you have done. Now, what you have done has probably piqued their interest. What you have done is probably gotten them to come out and watch you play. What you have done has built a foundation that's made you into a player that could play college softball. But ultimately, if you're going to have a scholarship offered to you, it's because that college coach in their mind is projecting what you will be and what you will become a couple years down the road. And so we have to understand that there's a vast difference between what parents think, players think, and college coaches think. Parents get caught in this trap all the time. They think that all this time, money, and effort that they've invested in softball, in recruiting trips, in travel ball, in showcases, in camps, in lessons, in equipment, was somehow an investment that was going to lead to a scholarship. Unfortunately, that's just very faulty thinking. And the athletic scholarship is something that not every player gets, even though every player wants one. And every player and her parents has to understand that the college coach is looking to you and what you will become in the future if they decide to offer you a scholarship. What you've done has opened the door, but what you've done will not get you the scholarship. And so we have to understand that. There's a line in a Clint Eastwood movie called Unforgiven that says something basically to the point of deserves got nothing to do with it. You don't deserve a college scholarship based on the player that you were. You might deserve one based on the college softball player that you will become. So that's misconception number 4. Misconception number 5. Again, we talked about the full rides a little bit before, but we're going to talk about this again. Everybody lies about scholarships. Of course I got a full ride with the Pinocchio picture. Well, we all know Pinocchio, his nose grew every time he told a fib. If this phenomenon existed for parents and players on the recruiting path and talking about their recruiting history, we'd see an awful lot of people walking around the ballpark that couldn't see the end of their nose because it would be so far out in front of their face. So this misconception about full rides is one of the things that is a gigantic trap that way too many people fall into. The reality of it is a full athletic scholarship is a very rare thing. A full athletic scholarship in softball is a very rare thing. If you get one in softball, chances are you're a pitcher. But here's what I know for sure, whether you're a pitcher who got a full ride or you're a utility infielder who got books, when you're all in a room with future players and friends and people that you know, you're all telling them that you got a full ride. How do I know? Because I've seen it in person. When I was coaching at Tennessee Tech, we had a great scholarship program that offered basically a 50% scholarship to out-of-state players who met a certain academic standard. Well, I had one girl who played for me that was on that scholarship. So half of her education was being paid for because she's so smart. Well, we had a little event going on, and the kids were milling around talking to future recruits and their parents and things like that. And I was just close enough that I overheard her telling a family and player that we were interested in that she's a full ride player. And I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't want to embarrass her, but I knew for sure she was not getting a full ride. Now, what does everybody assume when a player says I'm a full ride? That means that everything's getting paid for by an athletic scholarship. Now, in her case, she went to Tennessee Tech for free, but she went to Tennessee Tech for free because she was a genius who is also a very good softball player. The thing that I don't understand, and I asked her about this later, is why someone who's smart as she is, who now is working at NASA, doing all these amazing things because she's a genius, why did she feel the need to fib to a family about what her scholarship was? And she was honest. She said, well, coach, it just makes me feel better. It makes me feel like I'm a better softball player to be able to tell people that I'm a full ride kid. And I looked her in the eye and I said, but you're a genius. Said, yeah, but nobody cares that I'm smart. They want to know that I'm a really good player. And I was just dumbfounded by that. I couldn't believe that I'd heard those words come out of her mouth. So I advised her from now on, when somebody asks you, about your experience and how you're going to school, you can tell them that you're getting half of your education paid for because you're a great softball player, but then I would be bragging about the fact that the other half of your education is being paid for because you're a genius. You should be walking into every one of those conversations saying, hey, I love going to school here. This is a great opportunity. I love playing softball, but you know why I'm here? Because I'm the smartest person in this room. And she was. Why she felt like she had to shade it and make it look like it was her athletic ability that was paying for her education, I understand why that happens, but if you're smart enough to be working at NASA, kids, start bragging on that more than being a great softball player. Misconception number 6. We hear this one all the time. And how does this information get out? Again, sometimes it's from looking at a website, sometimes it's the scuttlebutt around the ballpark, but number 6 is they're all done with my recruiting class. Well, what does that mean? I'm a 2018 graduate, a 2019 graduate, a 2020 graduate. And someone has told me that School X is all done with that class. Well, here's what we want you to understand. That might be true today, but it could be absolutely untrue tomorrow. One of the things that's unfortunate about this is that way too many players, way too many parents hear the words all done, and then they ultimately think that that means that they have no hope. What we want them to understand is what's set in stone today can change in a second. Just again, remember back to the discussion we had about the college coach spinning the plates on the sticks. If one of those plates comes crashing down, their needs can change in a minute. And so if a coach tells you or somebody tells you that the school that you are most interested in has decided that they're done with your recruiting class, here's what I would tell you. Send them twice as much information about you. Get really active in sending them your information, your schedules, your videos, sending them highlights, making sure that they know everything that they know about what's going on in your life. Why is that so important? Because what happens when that plate comes crashing down? We want that coach to remember you first. We want that coach to think of you first. And when they think of you, maybe you are that plate that they pick up and start trying to spin on that stick. If you want to be a player that's still in play for that school, it's up to you to continue to work hard to market yourself to that coach. I don't think you should ever give up on the school you believe is the best school for you until you either A, start school there, or B, start school someplace else. When is it okay to give up? When you've started your education at a school that's not quite your dream school, but another school that you know is a good fit for you. And unfortunately, most players do the opposite. They hear a school is done with that recruiting class, they give up, they never send them another video, they never send them another schedule, they never have any contact with them again. And then what ends up happening, that college coach has something happen, somebody flunks out, somebody gets hurt, somebody gets married, somebody just gives up softball. You want to be the person that they're thinking of that second that happens. When that coach is sitting in his office and that player comes in to say, Coach, sorry, I'm just done with this. I don't want to play softball anymore. I'm going to give up softball and just focus on my education. Before that sentence is processed in that coach's mind, you want that coach thinking about, hey, but Sally keeps contacting me and Sally could fit the bill and fill that spot really well. So we want to make sure that if you hear that a school is all done with their recruiting, all that should mean to you as a potential recruit is to keep working at it, to keep fighting, keep sending information, because you never know when that 11th hour opportunity is going to come up. Misconception number 7, bigger is better. What does that mean for you as a player, parent, or coach? We all start off dreaming the big dream. What are the big dreams for softball players? Again, those big giant schools, SEC, Big 12, Big 10, Pac-12, that are playing in the College World Series on a regular basis. They've got all these amazing things going for them. They've got big giant football stadiums with 100,000 fans. They've got tremendous softball facilities, beautiful stadiums. They've got tons of money, tons of academic support, and all these kinds of things that make them so appealing. Well, the truth of it is that bigger is not always better. Now, these big schools are the right fit for some softball players, but they are the right fit for a very small percentage. And so the idea that a bigger school is always a better school is very, very faulty thinking. We want you to understand that for each player there's the right school, and for some players that right school is the small school, the private school, the very strong academic school, not necessarily the big football school. Bigger is not always better, and if you understand that in this recruiting process, I think that's going to open a lot of doors for you and give you a lot of opportunities to find a school that will be a great fit for you. We hear it all the time. When we talked about the websites before, what do we see listed on those websites? Verbal commitments. What's a verbal commitment? It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a promise. It's a handshake. It's an offer that is accepted that has absolutely no legal standing behind it. A verbal commitment in recruiting actually means nothing other than a coach made an offer and you accepted it. There is nothing about it that's legally binding. A verbal commitment is something that's become the rage because players and parents are dying to have the payoff of being able to tell everyone that all this hard work that they've done has led to this opportunity. And it's sort of the cherry on top of the sundae for them to be able to tell everyone that they've accepted a verbal offer or made a verbal commitment. Well, the verbal commitment is a trap that many players fall into because the verbal commitment doesn't really promise them anything. Now, I think a lot of college coaches mean everything they say, and when they make a verbal offer and offer to commit a player, they mean that they will honor that offer. But things change. Coaches get fired. Coaches retire. Things happen within a university that change a program. Sometimes the player changes her opinion and changes her mind and decides she wants to go to a different school. So the idea that a verbal commitment is a contract is something I hear all the time, but I can tell you that it's been fought in court, and the courts always say it's nothing other than a promise. It is nothing that is enforceable and nothing that is ironclad. When a coach leaves a school, there are players that are verbally committed to that school, and sometimes those schools will honor that commitment, sometimes not. Sometimes they will let a new coach come in and start with a clean slate, and players that other coach had committed are out of luck. So if you make that verbal commitment, understand one thing. You are in effect taking yourself off the market. When you take yourself off the market, other potential schools are not going to pay any attention to you. For me personally, the first thing I would do when I would sit down at a ball game was look through the roster sheet and cross off all the kids that were either signed or committed. And I didn't pay much attention to them because I didn't want to waste my time watching players that I had no opportunity to recruit. And so it's important for you to understand that once you put that on that roster sheet, once you put that out there on your website, what you are definitely telling a lot of other schools is, hey, I'm off the market. Now, if it works out and nothing changes, that's great. And if it works out for you, that's perfect. But we just want you to understand that if something changes and that coach that you committed to is no longer at that school, you have no leg to stand on as far as, am I still protected and am I still going to have the scholarship that was offered to me? Misconception number 9, and I hear this one mostly deep in the recruiting process when a player has received an offer. Often a parent-player feels that the scholarship offer that they've been given is not valuable enough, is not enough money compared to what they believed they were going to get. And I hear this all the time. If they really want me, they'll find the money. If they really need me, they can find the money. Well, the truth of the matter is that that's not true very often. And typically, if they do find the money to give you late in the process, it's because they've taken the money away from someone else. The way the rules work as far as scholarships go is simple. In Division I, a fully funded Division I program has 12 scholarships. What they do is they take those 12 scholarships and they divide them up into percentages. So think of a pie, and there's however many players on the roster. We cut that pie up into pieces, and each player gets the piece of pie that that coach can afford to give them. Some players, probably pitchers, are getting a bigger piece of the pie. Maybe they are getting a full scholarship. A utility infielder or the right fielder might be getting a much smaller part of the pie. But the reason we want you to understand that is the grand total has to add up to 12. Most college programs work right close to the margin. If they can give 12 scholarships, they're usually at 11.9 almost all the time. They want to invest all the money they can in getting the best players that they can. Well, if they're at 11.9, they don't have much more money to find. And so when a player makes up her mind that she's not going to accept an offer because she believes that it's too small and that that school can find the money if they really want me, unfortunately, that's not always true. And so we want to make sure that you understand that when a college coach makes you a scholarship offer, you should be flattered and happy that they think enough of you to offer you money to begin with. It's almost always exactly what they believe that your skills and your abilities are worth. And it's very uncommon for college coaches to get into negotiations where, again, the used car analogy that we used at the very beginning, where just because you try to negotiate and come back with a higher number that somehow they're going to counter. I think that's a very dangerous strategy. They've made you an offer. If that offer is not enough, you can certainly tell them, well, coach, I really like your school, but I just can't afford it with this amount of help. That's fine, but don't be shocked if their answer is, well, sorry, that's all we've got. We're going to have to find somebody that can help us that can make that amount of scholarship money work for them. So can they find the money? It's very rare that they can. Misconception number 10. Do you want to get a uniform and be on the roster, or do you want to play? One of the things that I talk to players about all the time is we ask them, why do you want to play college softball? And they always have a great list of reasons. And it's always exciting to hear the things about the game of softball that they love so much that they want to play it at the college level. But there's 4 letters in their answer that are the most important of all. P-L-A-Y. Kids want to play. No player is happy sitting the bench. I use this slide because you see the coach over here calling out signals, and then you've got 5 players that are standing at the fence because I'm sure that's their team rule. And I'm sure they stand at the fence to give the illusion that they're interested or that they care. But if you look closely, the facial expressions and the body language tells you that they think they should be playing. And so they've set themselves up for a situation where they're going to be inherently unhappy. So when you're looking at a potential school, sometimes you can be on a roster of a big-time great program. But if your role is going to be bench player or bullpen catcher or occasional pinch runner, you need to know that and be aware of that going in. If you're choosing one of those really strong softball programs, unfortunately, sometimes that means that you'll have to wait your turn or work really hard to earn a spot and ultimately might not be a full-time player or a starter. So there's 2 different ways you can approach it. I can be famous being on a big school and maybe get on TV cheering from the dugout because I'm a very creative cheerleader, or I can be on the field playing at a smaller school that might not be on TV quite so often. Again, it's up to each player to decide what's most important to them, but I've seen an awful lot of talented players who have gone to big-time schools and after they've gotten there, realize that they're going to school at the school that they wanted to, but their role in the program and their role on the softball team is not very fulfilling. So be aware of the fact that just because a school is interested in you does not always mean that they're visualizing you as being a full-time player or an impact player. So the next one and our last misconception is another one that's very, very popular, and I hear it all the time. It kills me because it's very untrue and a long way from what college coaches really think. The idea that utility players are in high demand runs rampant through this game. You hear it all the time. Well, if she can play a lot of different positions, she's going to be that much more valuable to that college program. And while that's true, college coaches do not typically recruit utility players. What college coaches are recruiting are the best player they can find at a specific position. Sometimes that means that they're recruiting shortstops, center fielders, and catchers. Whatever it means for each coach, what they are looking for is very good players who are really talented, who play one position extremely well. They are looking for the master of one, not the jack of all trades. We hear that all the time. That's one of the oldest sayings in the book. Well, the truth of the matter is that college coaches don't want players that are good at a lot of different things. They want players that are great at a couple of very specific things. And that greatness, to me, is demonstrated by playing your position that you play the best the most of the time. If you're one of those kids that has the ability to play other positions, that's okay. But you're not going to get recruited because you're pretty good at 4 different things. You're going to get recruited because you're great at one. Now, once you get on a college roster, if you were a great shortstop, but you can't quite beat out the shortstop who's there, the fact that you're talented enough and versatile enough to play another position is valuable. Being a utility player is valuable to that coach once you're there, but it's not going to get you recruited. Typically, the player who ends up filling that utility role on a college roster is a great center fielder, or a great shortstop, or a great catcher who's just not quite good enough to beat out the player that's ahead of them at their primary position. But they're still talented enough to play other positions well. Again, we talked about my 2007 team that had 5 catchers in the starting lineup. They were all great players who could fit in. And so that's why they found a way to get on the field. They were great hitters who could play other positions. But I recruited all of them as catchers, thinking that the competition between them would push all of them to get better, and if they were good enough, they'd find another spot on the field. So utility players, here's what I want you to think about. If you're on a team where your coach has you playing 4 or 5 different positions every game, I think you need to take this information and have a heartfelt conversation. I want to start to show college coaches what I'm best at. That's what they're looking for. Me being an average right fielder and a little bit above average left fielder and a pretty good shortstop and only getting to play third base a little bit, which is the one position I'm great at, is not helping my recruitment. And if it works out that that college coach is there to watch and the 3 innings that they get to see you play are in your 3rd or 4th best position, guess what they left their park believing that day? She's an average left fielder. What do you want them to leave there believing? She's a great third baseman. So the misconception that utility players are in high demand is absolutely false. Do not fall into this trap. If you are a utility player, figure out what your best position is and focus your energies on making that your best position, get great at it, and then let that be the ticket that gets you in the door for a college program. So that wraps up our misconceptions. There's 11 things that you hear at the ballpark every day. I'm going to tell you right now, we need to stop believing those, start believing the reality of what college recruits are and what college coaches are looking for in the recruits that they're looking for. So that's misconceptions.